The next thing we're going to do is put on the zipper tabs. The pattern said to just cut out one, so we would be putting it on one end of the zipper and not the other, and I actually prefer both ends of the zipper to have squares, so I'm just going to make two. So what we're going to do is, I need to think placement wise with my pattern. So if I stitch my bunny here and I unfold it, that's the direction my faces will be. If I turn them this way and stitch it, I think that's the direction I want them to be. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a little sandwich here. And you kind of have to think inside out and backwards. I'm going to make some center lines here too. Fold all my pieces in half and crease them so I have a line to work from. That's a nice tip you don't really have to mark anything, you just crease it. And then if I line up my zipper coils or my zipper teeth with my crease, I'll know it's centered. Okay, so here is the top of my zipper. I'm going to put the center of my rectangle here. I just line it up with the edge of my zipper tape. And then if you imagine like about a 1/4 inch seam allowance or so, I'm going to stitch right underneath my zipper stop. So my zipper stop is still visible when my bag is finished. And that's what it's going to look like. What you can do is you can either do both of them at the same time. So both of them would be right sides together with your zipper sandwiched in the middle. And you would just line up that crease with your zipper tape. And you just line it up with both of those center creases. Some people have a little bit of trouble seeing where they're going when they make it a sandwich. So I actually suggest to just do one first, and then you can see where you're stitching, and then you just restitch on that line. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to put a little pin in it. Line up the pretty side first. So this is the top of our bag. I'm going to line this one up first and pin it. Just one pin is plenty. And then I'm actually going to flip over my zipper and my pattern here. And then I'm going to stitch right here with my needle. My needle's just going to travel right here. And I can see where my zipper stop is because I'm on this side. Oops, I didn't change my thread color so you could see. I just stitched across near my zipper stop. That's what it looks like on the right side. And now I'm going to add the other rectangle on the other side here. So I'm going to line it up back here. You want to make sure if you have a directional pattern that you like the direction it's going. I just hold it in place, but you can sure pin it. There's no shame in that. Just make sure my rectangle is lined up and my zipper is down the center line there where my crease is. And then I look at these stitches that I just did, and I just stitch right on top of those. Don't forget to reverse when you start and stop. You really only skip reverse when you're basting or gathering, doing really long stitches, long loose stitches. Any other time you're sewing, you really do need to be reversing at the start and the stop. Okay, so that is my completed one end of my zipper, and I'm going to iron that, of course, and top stitch it eventually. So I'll iron that after I do the other end. That's one end. I just like putting these on. I think that it gives a more polished look for your product, and I think it keeps your zipper together, and it kind of lasts longer too. So same thing. The trick though with this end of the zipper where the pole is that you have to kind of move the pole out of the way to get it pinned, and it tends to separate like it's supposed to. So I like to hold the two ends together once I unzip it. And if you kind of lose track of them, just make sure that these two stops are pretty lined up. And then kind of slide your thumb down and place your fabric where you need to. Turn it over. Check the alignment. And then this one I need to pin both sides of the zipper tape for this. But I like to keep the center of my zipper on the crease that I made for the center of my rectangle. It just helps tremendously with lining up. Okay, for those of you that feel like you don't need to do one side and then the other, you can now go ahead and sandwich the other rectangle centered here. And then you can either mark with chalk or a pin where your stops are, because you don't want to hit those with your needle. Those are right here. And I'm going to stitch on this side of those stops. Just straight across like I did before. The reason why I didn't go clear over to these sides is I'm going to actually trim those off. I'm really only concerned about the width of the zipper and the zipper tape. Okay, let's see how we did. So if you would prefer to be closer to those stops with your fabric, you can just stitch a little closer, and I think that's what I'm going to do. So a little closer. I like to iron it open first to make that seam allowance really nice and flat. And if you see, there's a lot of bulk in here. There's a lot of fabric in my seam allowance. So I'm actually going to grade my seam, which means make one side smaller than the other. I usually kind of leave the zipper tape alone if I can. I just take one little bit off the one seam allowance, so it's slightly smaller than the other. And if you look, one seam allowance is shorter than the other, and that makes it so that there's like a gradual step down between the layers and not just one big chunk in the change of the thickness. So I'm going to iron on this side. Kind of pull it a little bit. You don't want to distort the shape, but you do want to kind of make sure that seam is nice and flat. And then I'm going to just do a little bit of steam and heat right there. Other end, grade one side. I generally like the side that's closest to the right side of the product to be the one that I grade, because then that just seems to be a smoother result in the end. And actually, since this part of the zipper is so rough, I'm going to just trim a little bit of that off too. Those teeth are kind of sharp. You can actually cover that up if you want, with a piece of bias tape if it bothers you, or like if it's on the inside of a garment that can be itchy. So I would usually cover that up with some bias tape before I finish it off. Just give the zipper tape a little tug. It kind of makes it nice and sharp. Okay. Now we're going to top stitch that. I think that the pattern says for a 1/8 inch seam allowance to top stitch it, but I just pick a nice close distance away from the edge of my fold there, and I just go with it and just make them both the same. I have to move my pole out of the way, so I'm just gonna slide it down. And then whatever the distance is when I top stitch on the other side, I'm gonna do the same. For the 1/8 inch top stitching though, this corner in my presser foot is my 1/8 inch. So whichever side the edge of your fabric lines up with, that would be the 1/8 inch if you want to do the 1/8. I usually like a little bit less than a 1/8 on this type of a thing. I just think it looks nicer, but that's my personal preference. Okay, so now I'm going to trim these off to be the width of the zipper tape. I actually like them slightly bigger than the zipper tape. That way I have just a little bit more leeway when I'm stitching my zipper in. You'll see what I mean. Now we're going to put in our zipper with our outside of our bag fabric. So the way we do this is we have right sides up here, and then this is the right side of my zipper. So I'm actually going to flip it wrong side up and right side down. So it's right sides together. So the right side of the bag with the right side of the zipper. And you can decide which way do you like your bag to open at this point too. I think on this bag it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to start with one. And you just kind of line up, kind of feel through here and find the end of your zipper tape. And that's really where the end of your bag goes. Or I like to center my zipper on my bag. And that's where, honestly, if you want to, you can either do a little crease here on your zipper tape with your iron on both sides. Just a little crease, doesn't have to be major. And then you can do the same thing with your bag, front and back. Taking the time to do these creases seems like a little bit overkill, but it actually really is worth doing in the end. The alignment for the entire project, it doesn't matter what project, but the alignment, it always works out much better if you have those center points marked. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my right side of my fabric and the right side of my zipper. So we're going to go right sides together. I'm going to match my center points, put a little pin. So when I'm lining up my zipper though, I want this side of my zipper lined up at the top, because once we make it, here, let me turn my camera here. Once our zipper is put in and our bag is together, this is how it's going to be if we put that side with this side. So then it'll actually be correct when we use our zipper. So it seems a little bit inside out and backwards, but stick with me, I promise it'll turn out. And then so you're not worried about lining up this part of this zipper pull cover, you're lining up the tape. So you kind of have to eyeball past that and line up the tape with the edge of the fabric. I just do a quick pin, and I don't really line up and pin this one down. You are welcome to pin all the way along here if you'd rather. You know, when I first learned how to do zippers, this is what I did. I pinned all the way down. You could also use your basting hand stitch and baste it down, but I prefer the center and the first end where I'm going to start. and then that's how I line it up. And if you look at your zipper tape a little bit closely, you can see how the weave in the tape changes, and there's like a line, and it's sort of built into the design of the zipper tape, and that's where we're going to be stitching. It just helps you stay straight on the zipper tape and make a really nice zipper if you just stick with the line that you're stitching by. Since this zipper is an exposed zipper, technically I could use my regular presser foot, but I really think zippers go in much easier when you use the correct presser foot. They actually make a zipper foot, and this is what mine looks like. Some of them are a little bit wider, and you can sort of like wide like this, and then you can decide which side you're going to be sewing on. But this is what mine looks like, and the way I change it is there's a little lever right here. Let's see if I can get this little lever right here goes up, and my presser foot comes off, and then there's a post right here, this little cone looking post, and that's where my presser foot lines up. And then this goes under that little tab. All you got to do is read your manual. It'll tell you how to change your presser foot. That's a pretty simple thing to do now. There's a few presser feet that are just really worth using, and definitely your zipper foot is worth it. Now, if you look, the alignment of my needle is now the center where this middle of my presser foot is. So that's going to go badly if I don't change the position of my needle. So I'm actually going to change my needle position. I like to go all the way over to the left when I'm doing zippers. And then that's going to make my needle able to be in this space right here with my zipper foot. And if you look now at my zipper here, so I'm actually going to start back here. I'm going to cut this off. So I can, gotta make sure you're not cutting your pin. I think I just clipped my pin with my scissors. I've ruined so many blades that way. So now I can see my zipper and how it's aligned. So I'm going to actually start back here, and then my stitching is going to be, so the edge of my presser foot's going to ride right next to the teeth or the coils of the zipper, and then that's going to force my needle to go right here where that change in the weave of the tape is. So my zipper foot is forcing me to stay on track. So I just want to keep the edge of my fabric lined up with the edge of my zipper tape. And if you notice, let me trim this one. So then I'm also going to trim it the length of my fabric here. Okay, so then my zipper pull is here, and it's going to be really thick. So basically it's going to force my zipper foot to go like out and around my zipper pull, and that's not what I want. So once I get here, I usually leave my needle down in my fabric, go down in my fabric, and then I lift my presser foot up and push my zipper pull up and out of the way. And I want to keep the edge of my fabric lined up with the edge of my zipper tape. Make sure you reverse at the beginning and the end. A little bit wonky there, but it's a good start. And then that's what it looks like, and it's done. So then we're going to put the other side of the outside of the bag on the other side of the zipper, which is going to be right here. You do want to press your zipper. I like to close it, of course. And then you're going to press this seam allowance away from the zipper. So kind of hold it and pull a little bit, and then you'll put your iron right there. You want to try not to spend a lot of time on the teeth or the coil of the zipper with your iron, because you really can melt that, and it's not something you can really fix once you melt it. You just basically have to have a new zipper. So that's how it should look. And now you can put the other, and you can still see my center crease actually a little bit. Now you can put the other side, right sides together. And you can double check here, make sure that's what it's supposed to look like. So we know we've got it lined up if we do it that way. So now we have right sides together. I moved my pole out of the way, and I'm going to just line up. You want to make sure that this side of your bag is lined up more so than the zipper edge being lined up. So if this side of your bag is lined up, you just follow it up, and then your zipper is going to be lined up. I didn't cut that rectangle very well. Okay. So you just pin right here. If the edge of your bag is lined up and you follow this up, you just pin it then. And then it will be lined up in the end. And then we're going to stitch all the way down and across, and just like we did the other one. Make sure to reverse at the beginning and the end. And your zipper foot is going to follow right next to the coils or the teeth of the zipper, and basically force you to stay in a good straight line. So once I have passed enough distance that I can move my zipper pull back, I'm going to leave my needle in my fabric, lift my presser foot, and push my zipper pull out of the way. Sometimes you have to use like your seam ripper. It also helps if you have the zipper pull in the up position. Sometimes they lock in the down position, so it's good just to put it up. And then you just continue down the row with making sure that the edges of your zipper tape line up with the edge of your fabric, and you just continue. To press again, make sure not to spend a lot of time on or near the zipper teeth or the zipper coils. Different people call it different things. Just make sure you're just kind of, you can't really avoid it. They're meant to handle a little bit of heat because of the dryer and everything, but you really don't want to hang out there with your iron. You also want to be careful. Some irons have like a Teflon sole plate, and if you are going over the zipper pull, you can actually scratch that Teflon off. So if your iron has that, you want to be careful of that. That's what the first part of your bag should look like. Let's see if I can get a better angle here. Your zipper and you would either have one of these tabs on this end and not on the other end, or you would have two like I have made. So now we are going to Think inside out and backwards. We want to put the lining now on the wrong side of our zipper. So here is, let's see, we're going to open it like this. Okay. So the lining is going to be, if we pin it like this, let's just practice pin here and pretend that we stitched it. If we stitched it here like this, it would end up like that. It's kind of tricky. My zipper pull looks like it's on this side. Okay. And that's how we want it to be. Right side, wrong side. The lining would be the pretty side though on the lining, and the raw edges would be inside. So that's what we're going to do, is stitch it like that. But you want to make sure that all of your layers are underneath here, and you're only stitching through your lining layer, the zipper, and the seam allowance of the outside layer. So we're still using our zipper foot. And if you look on this side, you can't see where you're going. But if you turn your fabric this way, and you can see where your stitching was when you did the outside of the bag. So all you need to do now is line up your lining with that part of the zipper. See, this is the zipper pull end, so I'm going to pin up here my starting point, and then I'm going to actually push my pull out of the way for a while. Okay, so I'm going to just keep this red side, or the edge of my lining, lined up with my zipper tape, and I'm going to stitch just like I did the other side. And if you can see your stitches from when you stitch the right side of the bag together. So you either want to stay on these stitches or on slightly on this side of these stitches. Otherwise your stitching will show on the other side of the bag. So the way I do it is I put my finger here, index finger on the zipper, and then I like hold the lining with these 3 fingers, and I kind of line it up like this as I go, and I'm sort of aligning that sandwich up as I go. And then this part of the bag and this part of the bag and then the other part of the lining, these are all 3 right here on this side, and nothing's on this side of my stitch plate except this seam allowance. Now I can tell my zipper pull is coming, so I'm actually, since I've passed that point, I'm going to leave my needle down, lift up my presser foot, peek in there, push the zipper pull out of the way again. It's a little bit thicker this time. And then now I'm going to realign my fabric, press your foot down, and continue. Okay, so then I'm going to, that's what that looks like. So you should have the open seam allowance from the other side, and this seam allowance should actually be sandwiched between the outside of the bag. Oops, can you see it? The outside of the bag and now the lining. So you shouldn't have any raw seam allowances on this side of the bag because they're inside. Now we're going to hold our zipper like this and put the other lining right side down so it's right sides together on here. If you want to double check, just hold it, and then that's what it should look like. The lining pretty sides should be on one side, and then you should have the batting from the outside, and then the right sides of the batting, or of the outside of the bag. So these two should be able to be right sides together if you let go. So now I'm going to feel through here. I'm actually going to start on this side so that I can see where my stitches are from last time. Make sure that this is the only two things you've got in the sandwich. So the lining and the zipper and the outside. This lining should be out of the way from the last time you stitched. Again, make sure you've got your layers here, not over here. I'm kind of coming to my pole. Here's my pole. The thickness is coming up. So I'm going to go a few more stitches, and then I'm going to move the pole out of the way. Just open the book pages here until you find the zipper pull. And then since it's already in the up position, I'm going to take my seam ripper and just push it. If your seam ripper doesn't work, you can just take like some closed scissors and push it also. So that's what it should look like. You should have the right sides showing. And if I close my zipper, it's probably a little bit easier to tell. There's the outside of my bag. I didn't line up my pictures very well. And the inside. Iron your fabric so that it is not near the zipper coils or the zipper teeth. Nice and smooth and flat. And then carefully flip it over and make sure that it's the same neatness on the back. That way, when we top stitch with our needle going next to our fabric here, we'll actually catch both sides, the front and the back and the lining, in our top stitching, and we only have to do it one time. I'm going to get this bit right here. It's a little bit not as sharp as I would like it to be for a crease. A couple of ways that you can top stitch. You change your zipper foot back to your plain foot. Move your needle off to the left or the right, whichever you like. Mine is off to the left currently. And then just keep the center of your plain foot on the edge of your fabric. The only thing is with that, you do either way have to kind of make sure that your zipper pull is not under the presser foot. Or there's another presser foot that I really like, sort of made for top stitching and neat things like that. I think we used this in another video, another project, when we did our tote bag handles and our pockets, or our ties for our apron. And that looks like this one, and it's for edge stitching. And that's the one that I'm going to switch it to today. It has this fin in the middle that keeps the fold of your fabric right next to it. And then if you move your needle off to the left or the right, whichever is better for your project, there's no way you can get off track, and your needle just really travels right next to the edge of your fabric here. So that's the one we're going to use today. I believe on the machines at school, they are called a hemming foot. But as long as this fin is in the middle and it looks similar, it's probably a a similar enough presser foot that it would work. So also when you top stitch, I like to lengthen my stitches just a little bit. So I'm going to go from a 2.5 to a 3.2, and it just gives you a neater appearance when you have a longer stitch length with top stitching. Don't forget to reverse at the beginning and the end. Once I get my presser foot past where the zipper pull is going to be, I'm actually going to stop and put my zipper pull back. It also doesn't matter what this side is doing when your zipper pull is pushed out of the way, because this is the side we're working on and the one that we're concerned about. Okay, I'm going to lift up my presser foot so that I can keep my needle in, but I want to also move this tail of my thread and get that out of my way, because it's just going to get tangled and make a bird's nest. So we want to get that out of our way. While I have my needle down and my presser foot up, I'm going to push my zipper pull also out of the way. And that's one side top stitched. If you notice, since we did a really neat job of pressing, the lining also is out of the way of the zipper pull when we use our zipper, and it is two birds with one stone. So now, instead of changing my presser foot or changing the direction I'm sewing, I'm going to go back to the beginning I had before, put my presser foot down, and this time I'm going to move my needle off to the right side all the way so that I can run down that side. Okay, now I'm going to move my zipper pull. There is our top stitching done on both sides of our zipper. Now we are going to combine. So now we have to open the pages of our book here so that the lining is right sides together. And then our zipper is sort of our halfway point, and then our outside of our bag is right sides together. So this is what it should look like. Here is the outside of our bag with our directional print, and the inside of our bag with our lining, and they are each right sides together. What do you do with this right here then? Our zipper. Our zipper tab is going to go into the lining, stack our top stitching, and pin parallel to the zipper. Okay, now we're going to smooth out our sides here. And if you notice where we cut out the corners for our boxed corners, we want to line those things up, all of these shapes. And we're just going to pin down the side here. We start with the directional print side when we start pinning, because we want the outside of the bag to be the neatest. And if the lining side isn't exactly perfect and we have to adjust it, then it's on the inside of our bag and nobody knows but you. So you give preferential treatment to the outside of your bag. Now if you notice, my fusible batting is shorter than the edge of my fabric, but when I do my 1/2 inch seam allowance, that's still going to get caught in in the needle there. Here's my 1/2 inch. It's going to get caught in the needle, so it will actually help reduce bulk. Now, this end, this is the bottom of the bag. So since we lined up these, we're now going to just pin. Make sure we have our center creases here, so you want to, they should be already lined up, but you do want to just double check. And then continue pinning this side together. You'll do the same with the lining. If you kind of pull the outside of the bag here a little bit, it'll smooth out enough to force that crease in the zipper that we've made and make this line up a little bit better than it was. We're sort of making sure your pins are going on the outside edge of your fabric so that when you're turning, when you're stitching, you can pull these easier. Again, line up your center creases. We're ready to stitch. So the outside of the bag, we're actually going to stitch all 3 sides here when we do this. So we're going to start here with our needle. We're going to stitch this direction and reverse. So reverse and reverse. And then we're going to pick up our presser foot and our needle, turn, and then we're going to stitch this, all of this side. We're going to reverse, pick up our needle and presser foot, reverse here, and stitch to here. Once we get to the lining though, we're going to continue across this and we're going to stitch here. So do you see how this kind of angles? We're going to be stitching and then a slight turn for this angle with our needle and our presser foot. So you'll have to turn slightly with your fabric. Reverse, pick up your needle and presser foot, and then here, reverse when you start. But then we're actually only going to stitch to about here because we're going to leave about this much open so that we can turn it right side out. So I'm going to put a double pin on each side of that opening so that if I am not paying attention and I don't see my line, I'll see the double pins. So I'll know to leave that open. So then we'll continue, we'll reverse at both of these. Then we're going to continue, reverse, pick up, needle and presser foot, start again, reverse, and reverse here. And if you want to overlap into the outside of the bag, that's perfectly fine. And that's how we're going to do the sewing together of the bag. I'm going to change my presser foot back and put my needle in the center again. I'm going to shorten my stitch length to about 2.7 or 2.5 even would be okay if you would rather have that. So my needle's in the center, my plain presser foot is on, and now I'm going to start stitching in the plan that I gave you. Ideally, I'm actually going to start right here. Oh. You also have to kind of give it just a little bit of a tug from each side so that you know this fabric here is cooperating the way you want. Okay, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to put my needle down and use my seam gauge to double check, make sure I've got my true 1/2 inch so I stay that way all the way around. So from my needle to my stitch plate is what I'm going to measure. And my 1/2 inch seam allowance is this line right before my 5/8 inch engraving on my stitch plate there. So don't forget to reverse. Just go slow right here. It's pretty thick. You don't want to break your needle. But if you don't reverse and secure that seam, your bag will come apart at the corners, and that's really not ideal as you're using your bag. Okay, here's my zipper again, coming up to it. So I'm going to kind of pull this apart a little bit so that it gets the correct shape. It is as accurate as we need it to be. So once you get close to this thickness here, you want to kind of just be aware and maybe push things out of the way. If you have to, stop your needle, lift up your presser foot, and then kind of sneak under there with it. And then, now remember, we had to change angle slightly. We're not doing a right angle, but we are slightly turning, so we want to do that. And then I will go back and take out my pins once I clear this. I'm coming up to my double pins here, so I know I'm going to have to reverse. You want to make sure you're at a half-inch seam allowance when you set your presser foot back down. Don't forget to reverse. If you don't set your presser foot down at a half-inch seam allowance, you'll have a little step in your seam allowance and your seam in your bag, and you'll actually change the shape of your bag by having that distance discrepancy if you don't make sure you're doing a half-inch seam allowance. Okay, now we're going to come back to the zipper again here. Okay, so we've got these. Now that's going to help us box our corners later. I like to cut these tails so they're not in my way when I'm trying to reverse my bag right side out. So that is what the stitching should look like on your bag. So this is the outside of your bag with the fusible batting, and this is the inside with the lining. And you have your opening. Okay, now we're going to press our seams open. So in doing that, we might crush our bag a little bit, but the iron will fix that later. Kind of just grab the sides of the bag here and do that. So we can get our seam allowances open here, nice and flat. Okay, and then open the side seams here. Do the same thing on the lining. Press those seam allowances open and flat. We don't have to run a serger or do any kind of seam finishes on these seams because they'll be all tucked inside of our lining, and none of them will be exposed to wear and tear. They'll all be inside the bag. It just adds more bulk. It's not like it makes the seam stronger by finishing it, so we're just going to skip adding bulk. If it was a coat, like a dress, like a suit coat, and those don't even have serged seam allowances inside for many of the seams because it just adds more bulk. Some of them are because structurally they're needed, but you don't generally need to finish seams if it's completely encased. If it's a skirt where you could see technically the seam allowances inside the lining because the lining is actually open at the bottom, it's just two hemmed skirts together basically, then you would definitely finish those seams with something, but since this is fully encased, we don't have to do that. If you've ever taken apart a winter coat, inside most of those seam allowances are also not finished with a serger or any other type of finish. There's just not a need for it. It's just more time and thread to be used. Okay, so we're going to box our corners now. So now that we've opened up our seam allowances there, I'm just going to make sure that these are nice and smooth. See how I kind of crease that one in that wonky direction. You just want to stack your seam allowances here together, and you're going to pin right inside that seam. And if you put your pin into the seam and it comes out in the seam on the other side, you know you've got it lined up correctly. Whoops. And then same thing, you put your pin in the seam and it should come out in the seam, and then you know that's going to be lined up. And do that with all four corners, the two of the outside of the bag and the two of the inside of the bag. Okay, so now we're going to go back in and stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance across here on all four corners. Half-inch seam allowance. All four corners are stitched. Let's remove a little bit of the bulk here. I'm just going to trim them just a little bit. We don't want to go crazy when we're trimming. That kind of weakens it if there's not enough fabric for it to hold on to. So don't go too close. But we don't want all of that thickness in our corners because it just, yes, They just won't lay right. It'll just be it'll feel like we stuffed something in our corners, and it'll just wear out faster if there's too much going on in there. Okay, so that's what those look like. I actually am not going to press those open on this side. And now I'm going to reach my hand into this opening here and pull out our bag like a magic trick. To push these out, you could use the end of a knitting needle, like the wide end, or you could use some closed scissors. I think you should be able to reach in there pretty well though with this bag. It's not too big of an area to deal with. Just push these out nicely, and then we will iron those also. Something else you could do if you want to kind of level up your bag here is if you have maybe you have flowers or something, before you put your bag together, you could quilt around this, just stitch around it through the quilt batting that you fused onto there, and that'll kind of give it some three-dimensional effects. Okay, we're going to iron our corners, and then we have to ladder stitch our opening closed here like we did on our tote bags, and then push it inside and we will be done. Just going to iron right here. Just use the tip of your iron, get in there. Okay, your seam's nice and smooth and flat. Get the tip of your iron into those corners again. Same thing with the lining corners. And since we pressed our seam allowances before, these are just ready to be ladder stitched. We will just continue that same seam allowance distance, and no one will even know that we hand stitched it closed. Let's do the ladder stitch now on the inside of our bag. So first, take an arm's length of your thread. I know that I used gray thread on the rest of the bag, but I actually like it to match exactly when I do hand stitching. So this will just kind of mask any imperfect stitches if you have any. I have two hand needles here, and if you look carefully at their eyes, one is a longer eye and one is got more of a rounded eye. When you're hand stitching for something like this, you want to kind of think about what's the shape of your thread. The thread that I'm using is round, of course, which would give the application to this sharps needle here on the left. That just gives us some more, it helps the thread kind of twist in the needle and not necessarily tangle as easily as it could. These flat eyes, more of the longer flat eye, is made for more like embroidery, when you would have like 2 or 3 strands next to each other and you're trying to do more thickness. So for this purpose, we are going to use the round eye and not, which is more of an all-purpose needle, and not the longer eye. Go ahead and thread your needle by folding your thread in half in the eye. So you just one strand first, and then you fold this strand in half inside the eye. Pull your tails together-ish. They don't have to be perfect. Okay, so there's my thread in half. The halfway point is in the eye. Oh my goodness, it's not focusing today. So my thread is half in the eye, and then here are my tails that are together-ish. I'm going to now put my tails on top of my needle, facing the eye, hold them. Here's just a quick review of the knot. Wrap it around 3 or 4 times and then sneak that part, the wrapping, into your fingers as well. So you have the eye of the needle, you have the eye, the tails, and the wrap. And then you're just going to hold on to all 3 of those things and pull carefully, not letting go of your grasp here. And then I got my tail stuck in there backwards, but it's still a knot. We're going to call it good. And there's your knot. Okay, now you're going to go to the machine stitching here. Yes, we've reversed. We reversed with our machine at the opening. And so we're going to just go behind that stitching a few stitches, come out back here, come out behind that knot that you made. And I like to work, I'm right-handed, so I like to work from right to left in the seam. So since I came inside there, my knot is actually going to be inside the seam allowance. And then I'm just going to mimic right over top of these machine stitches for a few stitches to kind of blend myself in. So remember, you're working in the fold of the seam allowance. You're not going through the layers of the fabric. So you shouldn't be able to see your thread, on the top or the inside. You're going in this inside this fold right here. Come out right there. Okay, just as a reminder, where this one comes out, across from there into the other seam allowance is where you go in next time. So this one comes out here. I'm going to go across here and go in. So we're not going into the fabric, we're going into the tunnel. So you shouldn't see your stitch on the outside of the fabric or on the seam allowance. It should be inside there. So if I look inside my seam allowance, in that tunnel, that's where my stitch is. And you just work back and forth approximately the same distance that the other stitches were apart. Once you get the hang of this stitch, you can find a rhythm and it goes pretty quickly. It's also a little bit easier to do if you're not trying to look through a camera lens while you're stitching. got my thread caught on my zipper pull. Now it's okay. See, if you pull too tight, that's what you don't want that for your seam allowance. So you kind of scratch that out if you can. And then don't pull as tight next time. See how my thread is bubbling on one or the other side? So I just kind of gently pull on them until I decide which side that is. There we go. And then I even it out through my, push out that extra through my needle eye. We're coming near the end of this opening, but we're going to actually stitch over a few of the machine stitches just to give us a nice strong overlap. Okay, so how do I tie this off? I'm going to go back and grab the last stitch that I made. And there's a loop that I make in that process. And I'm going to not let that loop close. I'm going to put my needle in it. That makes a new loop. You can see it here. So I'm going to hold on to the new loop with my left hand or my non-needle holding hand. Hold that loop, let the first loop that you made close, and then pull your needle, making that second loop smaller, and then put your needle into that loop. Now you have two loops again, but you're going to let them both close and give them a couple of quick tugs, and that's a knot. I like to do that twice just for my own peace of mind that it's not going to come out. So first loop that is made in the process, hold that, put your needle into the first loop, hold the second loop and let the first one close. There's the first one right there. I'm going to let that one close. And then here's the second loop in my finger. I'm going to put my needle into that second loop and let that one and the third one close. A couple of quick tugs, and then you put your needle in the fabric right next to your knots. And just push it through pretty far. And it can come out, you want it to come out at least an inch away, if not more. And then you just tug it a little bit so it's a little bit tight. See how the fabric is buckling? And then I'm going to cut right next to my fabric, but don't cut your fabric. And then that tail is now inside, and it won't be sticking out through your seam allowance there. Now we're going to iron this so that we don't have that kind of waviness that I made. We'll iron that smooth. Iron our ladder stitch smooth here. It's okay to get in there with your tip of your iron. Get it nice and smooth. And then we're going to push our lining inside of our bag. And you want to focus on pushing those corners in, kind of put your fingers like this into the corners and push out those corners. And then you slide your fingers up here to where that zipper trim was that we made. I have a knitting needle here that I'm just going to kind of use to really get in there and press nicely and get that out. I just think that these zipper trim covers kind of just make it look a lot more professional. Also, there is my new stop. It's trying to come out, so you could put a little dot of fabric glue there if you want to make sure your thread's not coming out. If you want, but there's my new stop that I made when I shortened my zipper. Push out the other corners. See, there's the inside here. Just going to put my 2 fingers in those corners. Okay. Smooth out the bag on the inside. And see, I didn't push this one out yet, this corner. I'm going to stick my knitting needle inside there and push that out carefully. If you have too small of a knitting needle, you really want kind of one of those big chunky ones. This one's nearing the too narrow size. But then you kind of just push that out so that it's nice and uniform with both corners there. And then do you see how I got this? I kind of made my batting and fusible really warbled and warped there looking. So I'm just going to go back over and steam that nice and smooth. You could also put a tailor's ham or a sleeve roll inside there and really get it smooth. You could also put it on the end of your ironing board here. I'll show you that. So that you can get, I think our zipper's too short for this. So I will just put my sleeve roll inside. So, and I see how I pressed my seam allowance on the inside when we were working on the inside of the bag, but I'm going to press it now here too. I just think it looks a lot neater if we press it nice and flat. You can also sort of mimic a flat bottom of your bag if you sort of pick it up by these corners and make kind of some mock creases. You just crease it with your iron. Sort of make it stand up a little bit better when you use it. Just pick it up. Pick it up from your corners. Stretch it a little bit here. Make it nice and straight. And that kind of gives it a little bit of a flat bottom to sit on. So that is your toiletries bag or your zipper bag that we have made. The lining, the zipper with the new shortened zipper stop. Something you could do also to add just a little bit of polishing to it So get this. This is just not wanting to lay down. You could take the tiniest bit of bias cut fabric and just make a quick little bias tape here if you want. I think that's going to be too thick. It really doesn't, you don't want it to be very big. Remember, you fold it in half first, and then you fold the ends into the halfway mark. This is really tiny. Okay, I top stitched my bias tape that I made, and I'm going to put it into my zipper pull here. So go ahead and fold it in half. I hope it still maybe is too big. Let's try it. Got a tiny little crochet hook here. You could probably do it with a thick needle or even maybe your presser foot, but I was worried, or your seam ripper, but I was worried I might tear my fabric. Okay, so you make a loop. Oh my goodness. Make a loop with your bias tape. And just put your tails into that loop. pull it tight. And that's a way to elevate your homemade gift, or turn a plain zipper into a long pole bag zipper. Now, I'm not going to leave it this long. You could either tie it like a balloon at one end, if you want, nice and tight, and then cut the tails, or you could just cut the tails and let them fray naturally if you want. But that is the toiletry bag.